Okay, this video will help you with your homework, and as we'll review some of the things that we learned in class today, and we'll go a little bit deeper. So in class we spoke about how when Hashem told Moshe about this idea of sending the spies, he didn't say shlach anashim, he didn't say send spies. Instead he said shlach lecha anashim, which means send for yourself. Incidentally, the English here doesn't do it justice. Send men? No, it's shlach lecha anashim. So Rashi understood that this means that they were being given an option. This is not a commandment to send spies. They didn't have to send spies. Rather, they were given permission. They were given the option of sending spies if they wish. And the reason why it was not a commandment is because Rashi pointed out, Bnei Israel were already told in Mitzrayim that the land that Hashem was giving them was a good land. So the act of sending spies now would be considered very disrespectful. It's like you're doubting God's assurance that the land is good. So Rashi learned that this whole mission was wrong because they were doubting God by the fact that they sent spies to check if what God said is really true. That's how Rashi learned. Then we discussed the Ramban. The Ramban says that the mission really was not to see if the land was good. That was not the main objective. It was really to see how to conquer the land. And to conquer the land, that's something that people are entitled to do because the idea is that we're supposed to help ourselves. We can't just sit back and expect God to do miracles for us. That would be a chutzpah on our part. And our part would be very arrogant that I deserve God to change nature for me. So we have to help ourselves. So therefore, there was nothing wrong with sending the spies. That was the proper thing for them to do. What went wrong is something else. And that we'll discuss in class when we look carefully at the psukim over here. And that is when the spies begin to present the report. We saw how there was truth in what they said, starting with verse 27. But we also saw that there was a very significant, very subtle word here, which is the word ephes. Ephes means in modern Hebrew means zero. It also means but. It also means however, which indicates that their spies now are moving away from the facts that they're presenting, but stating an opinion. And that opinion had very terrible consequences because it affected the Jewish people's morale, that they became frightened. And that opinion is when they said, but however, the people that inhabit the land are very strong. And they're fortified, the cities are very powerful. And they begin to say how the Amalek tribe lives in the south, which will be the first people that they would have to fight with, and other nations. And Caleb, of course, being one of the righteous spies, tries to silence the people and tell them, don't worry, we're able to do this. And finally, the people that, the group of spies that went, they began to speak about how we're not able to already is saying the opinion, and also lies that the people are stronger than us. And they began to say, and finally in 32, that the land that we surveyed was a land that devours its residents. Devours the residents means that it causes the death of the inhabitants because it's a harsh land. And all the people that we saw there are people of huge size. So this is already a lie. But that's how they build up their presentation. And then later on we'll talk about why the spies would do such a thing. They were not bad people. Why would they do this? We did speak in class a little bit about this last pasuk, which is very significant, that talks about how the spies felt when they were in the land. They felt so small that they viewed themselves as grasshoppers next to people. But they also went ahead and said, you know, the enemy, the people of the land must also have seen us as grasshoppers. And when I asked you that question, you guys gave some very, very interesting insights as to how would they know. Some of you explained that they imagined that. They didn't know that for sure how the enemy felt towards them or perceived them because they wouldn't know for sure. But possibly they were just imagining, and it's good reason to imagine like that because when you feel yourself inferior, then you think that people see you as inferior to them also. It's a projection. Projection is when we put our feelings on somebody else, even though their feelings really stem from us. Some of you already explained a very interesting answer, which is from the fact that the enemy didn't bother to attack the spies, it must be that the spies, the enemy was not frightened by the spies. They saw them as nothing, like just a mere grasshoppers. Okay, what we're going to talk about now is a very, very important idea, which Rashi discusses at the very beginning of this parak, which is really the beginning of Parshat Shlach. Okay, this is Parshat Shlach. And that is a concept that has to do in your notes with question number 12. If you look in your worksheets in question number 12, I ask you to look at the first Rashi, which starts the word Shlach Lecha. There are two Rashis that start with the same title. So now we're looking at the first one. And Rashi here asks the following question. Here Rashi actually asks the question, Lama nismecha parshat ameraglim le parshat Miriam. This section before that we studied last week talks about how Miriam and Aaron spoke about Moshe. And Rashi wonders, why is this parsha of the spies follow this parsha? Lama nismecha, why are they put together? Samuch means close. Lama nismecha parshat ameraglim le parshat Miriam. Why are they put next to each other? Now, to understand the force of this question, it's important to know the following. The Torah is written in order, but it's not always written in chronological order, meaning it's not always written in the historical order in which things happen. There must be a reason why some things are put next to each other, especially when those things didn't happen in historical order. So, for example, the spies did not start their journey right after Miriam spoke. So why is the story of the spies put right after Miriam and Aaron spoke? There must be some connection between these two things. Again, if it's just history, well, it's being told in historical order, that's the order it happened. But Rashi points out that that's not always true in the Torah. Sometimes the Torah purposely puts things together, even though they didn't happen one after the other. It puts them together because we learn something from that connection. And what is that message? Okay, so if you look in your notes, so we're now into the next page, and that, as Rashi puts it, Lama nismecha parshat Meraglim and parshat Miriam. Right? Why are they put together? Why is the parsha, the section that discusses the Meraglim, the spies, placed next to the parsha of Miriam? And his answer is the following. He says, is to show you that the spies spoke inappropriately and they did not learn the message of Miriam and Aaron. Meaning they didn't learn the lesson. Miriam and Aaron spoke inappropriately and they had a consequence. They messed up and Miriam suffered. So now come the Meraglim, they commit the same mistake, which is they speak inappropriately. And you fail to realize that was wrong, because look what happened to Miriam and Aaron. They suffered when they spoke inappropriately, so you should already learn your lesson. So the spies is an example of people who fail to learn the lesson that was mentioned just before. So this is what they put together to show you how the Meraglim committed the same mistake in spite of the fact that Miriam spoke inappropriately and she suffered. Okay, that's what Rashi says. That explains the connection between the two parshiot. But let's go a little bit further. So what Rashi pointed out is that both stories show inappropriate speech, and they both show consequences for the inappropriate speech. And the problem is that the Meraglim, the spies, failed to get the message. But if you compare the two stories, there's a very, very important difference. And that is that Miriam and Aaron spoke inappropriately about a human being. They say something wrong about Moshe, about his decision making, why he married her, and so he was away from her. The Meraglim also spoke inappropriately, but they spoke inappropriately about a piece of land, not about a person. They spoke about the land of Israel, that it's a land that devours its residents, that the people there are, the land is too harsh to support life. So what they're doing is not the same like Miriam and Aaron. Miriam and Aaron spoke poorly about a human being that has feelings. But the spies, when they speak inappropriately, they're not hurting anybody. They spoke bad about a piece of land. So how is that comparable to what Miriam and Aaron did? Granted that you shouldn't speak inappropriately about a person, I get that. But how does that teach you that you shouldn't speak appropriately about a thing, about an inanimate object. I don't learn that from Miriam and Aaron. So we have to understand what Rashi means. Why is this lesson that the spy should have learned from Miriam and Aaron? What kind of lesson? The two stories are not comparable, really, except for in a very superficial level. But perhaps what we learn here is something very, very important, very deep. And that is that when the Torah talks about things that are appropriate or inappropriate, like midot, the way that we should act, the way we should relate to others, it's not just because of how it's going to affect somebody else. It's also because it affects the person. So if the Torah tells us don't steal, okay, we understand. Every society understands that it's bad to steal. But most societies and most people focus on stealing as how it affects the person, the victim. What the Torah is trying to teach us is that stealing is not only, like everything else, it's not just affecting the victim, it also affects the character of the individual who steals. You become a dishonest person, you become a corrupt person, you don't value things, you become a bad individual. The same thing is when we speak Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is not just because you hurt somebody else's feelings. That's a big part of it, of course. But ultimately, it's because it damages the person who speaks like that. It's like, what kind of person are you that you focus on the negative things about people? So forget about the impact on other people, which is devastating. What about the impact on yourself? Or like, for example, we learned in Vayikra, you put a stumbling block before a blind person. So it's not just that you're misleading the other person, it's also what you're doing, how you become a person who takes advantage of other people. Or let's say the Torah told us don't curse a deaf person. The deaf person is not hurt in that case at all. But certainly the one who's doing that definitely destroys their personality, you damage your character. So therefore, what we learn over here, guys, is that when the Torah talks about Miriam and Aaron speaking that's inappropriate, Moshe was an anav. Moshe was humble. Moshe didn't take it personally. Moshe wasn't hurt by those things. It didn't affect Moshe in the least amount. But still, it was wrong because speaking inappropriately about other people is wrong in of itself, regardless of whether it affects other people or not. So this is what the spies failed to realize. They spoke inappropriately about land. You're right, the land has no feelings. But it's not just about the victim, it's about yourself. Don't speak in a way that damages your character, that shows cynicism and negativity about things. That's not appropriate, and that's what the spies failed to learn from the story of Miriam and Aharon.